Thank you for watching. The following tutorial is a session that I have taken out of my online course, which teaches people to get off automatic on their DSLR camera and go on to extraordinary photography. Basically getting off auto and going on to manual settings of your camera. If you want to see more about this, and I advise it if you want to get off auto, and have a look at the link in the description below. Thank you. Welcome to this video tutorial on shutter speed. What I'm going to show you today is a bunch of photographs that I've chosen covering all sorts of different shutter speeds, and I'm going to show you and discuss why I have used that particular shutter speed for that particular photograph. Shutter speed is not right and it's not wrong. You're going to choose your shutter speed depending on the amount of light available, depending on your aperture and depending on your ISO. And you're also going to choose a shutter speed to get creative, to change the light in your photograph, and also to get creative with slowing down motion or making sure that your photographs are very sharp. I'm going to start with the slowest shutter speed that I've got here, and I'm going to start with this photograph, which is a star trails photograph. I've also left the settings of the photograph on the screen for you to see. You can go back in the video and check the particular photographs I've got, and you'll be able to see the basic camera settings that I've chosen. In this photograph, it says there that I've photographed at 5,596 seconds. It turns out to be around about 1.5 hours of exposure on this photograph. So what I've done here is I've put my camera out in the field somewhere, probably on a camping trip, pointed it up at the stars, and using a shutter release cable, or even maybe something like the Myops remote trigger, I've locked the shutter open for 1.5 hours. And what you're actually seeing here is the Earth spinning. So the Earth spins, which makes it look like the stars have trails. The stars here are actually blurred because of that movement of the Earth, which is quite wild to think of it in that way. What you have here, if we take this star over here as an example, the shutter opened over here, the Earth spun around for 1.5 hours, and I close off the shutter here, and you get these pretty lines coming across the screen, giving you star trails. You can also use this technique for photographing cars. You don't have to leave it open for 1.5 hours. Photographing cars, car trail lights, and waterfalls and that type of thing. We move on talking about water. There you have a photograph of a long exposure of 30 seconds, photographed at a seaside town at the west coast of South Africa. And using a tripod, I've pointed my photographs at my camera at the waves, and the water has come in and given you this misty, blurry effect as the water pours over the rocks. This line of white over here is the white water of the waves breaking out of the reef beyond. You've got streaky effects in the clouds. I just felt it looked a bit better in black and white. There wasn't much color in this photograph. You can see it was a cloudy evening. This was taken soon after sunset. So in order to get a slow shutter speed, you also need quite a low amount of light in your photograph. So bright sunny day, you're going to struggle to get a shutter speed of very slow, around about 30 seconds. There's just going to be too much light around, and your photographs are going to come out overexposed. Another photograph of 30 seconds taken off Cork Bay Harbour late in the evening. You can see the outline of the mountain against the sky and the lights of the city in the distance. Often when you do a long exposure of 30 seconds, you get these star bursts on any bright light shining. And what you see is the sea comes out a misty effect because of the motion of the water moving over those 30 seconds that your shutter doors have been open. Now the photograph at 30 seconds in here, what I wanted to do was to get the color of the sky. This is a blue hour, so about half an hour after sunset, and photographed in this particular hotel in Cape Town. I had a client doing an event there, so I wanted to capture the hotel for their story as to where they stayed when they visited Cape Town. If we zoom in onto the palm trees here, you can see through that 30 seconds, you can see movement in the palm trees. So again, not right or not wrong. You might want that type of effect, or you might not want that effect. But if the wind was really blowing strong, those palm trees would be even more blurred. There aren't any people in this photograph, otherwise they would also be blurred if there's somebody walking past through that 30 seconds. This one is taken also down at the waterfront in Cork Bay, and this one was taken at 4 seconds. There as well, at 4 seconds, you're getting beautiful starbursts from the lights around in the restaurant. Some nice reflection coming off the water. Something you need to be careful of when you start doing low shutter speed or low time in your shutter speed is any movement of people or boats or cars. In this case, we have got some people sitting at the restaurant in front here, and as you can see, they're coming out very, very blurred. So they're not too prominent, but that is something that you need to take into consideration when you're photographing, and then either crop them out or find a space where there aren't people or moving objects in your photograph. Anything that's going to be moving is going to become blurred. Moving lights work quite well, but moving people, they come out a little bit ghostly, which isn't the greatest. When you're photographing indoors, in this particular case at a particular event, I'm photographing the setup of the event before the delegates or the guests arrive. Would have been better, I'm just noticing now that none of the candles are lit. It would have been better if the candles had been lit. But yeah, I photographed at 1 second. I'm using the available light in the venue. And again, I have my camera on a tripod, so as there's no movement of or any camera shake in the photograph. And photograph that at 1 second to bring up the ambient light of the setting. Fireworks, there isn't really a correct fireworks exposure. If you do a Google search, people will give you certainly different apertures and different speeds to use. Yeah, I quite like this effect of a 1 second aperture. Again, tripod facing up, and would have been using my remote cable shutter release here, and held the shutter open for 1 second, and got that quite nice effect. If it is a very windy evening, you're going to probably need a faster shutter speed, otherwise your bursts of the fireworks are going to be very blurred as the wind takes the fireworks away. I really like this photograph, which really shows you the impact of that wave on the rocks. So that's photographed at 1/6 of a second, and that I can use as a reference whenever I go back down to this particular place, which I know well, Cork Bay in Cape Town. I can focus in on that particular rock if the waves are rough, and I know that at 1/6 of a second I'm going to get a really good burst of sea spray coming over the rock. It was pretty cloudy that day, so I've converted it into black and white to give it an effect, and certainly your eye goes into that area of the wave hitting the rock. Here I was doing a shoot for a client where they wanted their event halls photographed. So here I photographed at 1/10 of a second. I've used f9 to give me a fairly deep depth of field, and because of that I've needed to use a fairly slow shutter speed in order to get the setting in with the available light that I had. Indoors, you can see the lights are shining down, not a huge amount of light. So hence the reason why I've used 1/10. There's no moving objects in there. And I would have used my tripod. If I didn't have my shutter release cable, I would have used my 2 second exposure, 2 second self timer on the camera. Again, just to minimize any chance of camera shake when I'm taking the photograph. So this was a little bit of fun. Also at 1/10 of a second, the indoor horse arena. You probably weren't to realize there was a horse without me telling you. But there I've just playing around, maybe in between when my daughters were riding. I don't think I'd take a photograph like this of my daughters. I don't think they would really be too impressed. But there I've taken a 1/10 of a second. You can see the horse is moving. The horse is very, very blurred. So just playing around. You can see the jumps are very, very sharp. And that's because I have the camera either on tripod or resting it on the railings of the arena. So this one I've purposely done at a slow shutter speed. This was at a trade show, and it's people showing off their fitness treadmills. And what I've wanted to do there is to get the sense of movement of the people running on the treadmills. And I photographed at 1/30 of a second, where you can actually see the movement of their legs. The actual treadmills obviously are in focus because they are all still, so you can see the branding in the photograph. and the blurriness of the people's legs. This one I've taken at 1/30th of a second, showing some movement at a party. You can see this lady dancing over here, her hair flying around, a bit of blur on these guys in the front there. So that's just to give a little bit of creativity at a dance party. 1/30th of a second. You can try it at 1/20th, 1/15th, play around with your settings there, depending on how fast or slow the folk are dancing and what movement is. The camera has moved a little bit, because if you look at this tree, at this chair over here, you'll see a little bit of movement on the chair as well. So there, I wasn't using a tripod, I was just trying to hold my camera as steady as possible. That photograph, 1/30th of a second, we go back to the one where I took at 30 seconds. You can see the sea here, the water is much more static, giving some nice reflection still. And 1/30th of a second, soon after sunset, and it's bringing out the nice color of the blue hour in the sky. The lights of the restaurant are shown as well, the light of the clock. Again, tripod would need to be used. Anything from around about 1/60th of a second or lower, you need to consider using a tripod. Unless you know that you are very, very steady on your feet and your arms holding the camera are very, very steady. Probably not under anything under 1/60th of a second. This one I've got creative here. This is taken early one morning. We get onto a local tidal pool called Dalebrook in Cork Bay in Cape Town. It is alongside the local railway tracks, and pretty safe where the girls are sitting there. They're away from the train, but the train does zoom past behind. I've taken this photograph at 1/50th of a second. I wasn't using a tripod, going against what I just told you. I was hand holding it and did it at 1/50th of a second to get the sense of the train moving past behind them, with them sitting in the early morning sun after their swim. I'll leave it up to you to guess which way the train was going. Hopefully the photograph depicts which way the train was actually moving there. Right, I've taken two photographs here of our dog Rocky on our local beach. I haven't really bothered much with the exposure and stuff, except on this one. So you've got those two photographs. And what I wanted to show here is the effect of movement of your subject and the effect of camera shake. In this particular one, you can see the seaweed in the background. That is pretty in focus, but the dog Rocky is not in focus at all. And what happened there was I used on purpose a very slow shutter speed, 1/50th of a second. And as I took the photograph, so Rocky moved. And by him moving, other stuff is in focus, but the dog himself is out of focus. On this next photograph, I pretty much was trying to do the same thing. There I photographed only at 1/20th of a second. And the Kelpnet in the background is in focus. It's a little bit soft, so I was holding the camera pretty steady. But I quite like the way that his front paw here is blurred out and the fur around here is actually blurred. I quite like that photograph, a bit of a mistake photograph, and I quite like it in a high contrast black and white. But also, though, it's not an award-winning photograph, because that will be out of focus in any judge's eye. Right, moving up a little bit here, we're taking photographs now at 1/100th of a second. So that's pretty much medium speed, used a lot in the evenings. The lower the speed there, you also get to get the ambient light in the background in the photograph. You take a photograph at sort of very high shutter speed, 1/2000th of a second, you'd lose a lot of that light in the background there, and your photograph would the background come out quite black. So in this case, you're actually getting a nice sense of where the people are, using a flash as well, which has highlighted the subject. So more people photograph. Yeah, I haven't used a flash. Here you're also at 1/100th of a second, using the available light at a trade show under the big lights of the hall. I've pushed my ISO up quite high, ISO 2000, and photographing them at 1/100th of a second. Everything pretty static in the photograph. They're standing still. There's no movement around, what have you. So quite a safe photograph or shutter speed to use in a photograph like this. More people, in this case I would have used a flash. You can see the flash that's bouncing off the eyes, the light in the eyes. And 1/60th of a second here also brings out a lot of the ambient light in the background. When you use the flash, it also tends to freeze motion, so you can, if you want to, you can use a flash, but you can use a flash, photograph at a lower shutter speed if you are using flash, because it tends to freeze any movement that you have in the areas where the flash reaches. Also 1/60th of a second, probably would have used a tripod here, a hall at a conference, people sitting pretty still, so not much risk of having camera or movement of your subject in the photograph. If there was somebody standing up and moving their hands, if there was somebody standing up and moving their hands about, that would be blurred photographing at 1/60th of a second. 1/100th of a second, photographing these dancers. So they've come up pretty, their faces are pretty sharp, but if I zoom in over here on their hands, you can see that there's movement on their hands. So there you know that at 1/100th of a second, somebody moving their hands around, what have you, that's not going to be fast enough. You need to up your the speed quite a bit, maybe 1/500th of a second, in which case you probably, because we're using the available light here of the indoors, we'd have to push our ISO up quite far to get that speed up as well. Man on stage at a conference, 1/100th of a second, more than enough, not a lot of movement around here. Also been very, very steady with the camera. I've used a very wide angle, 16mm there to take everything in, and that then also takes in a lot more light. So young dancers dancing around. I've left this one in. It's not the greatest photograph. Again, the backgrounds I've mentioned before, backgrounds, this tape cutting the dancers in half. Quite a busy background. This gentleman taking a photograph over here. The reason I've left this in though is I photographed that with the available light. My ISO is quite high. It was in a hall, and I photographed at 1/100th. So they are pretty sharp, but if we go down to her shoe, you can see the movement in the shoe there. So at 1/100th of a second, you really are on the borderline of any movement that's happening in your photograph. You're going to get blurred effect, which isn't great in photographs. In this case, maybe it shows a little bit of movement with her feet. His face is nice and sharp, but you're on the border there at 1/100th of a second. Still 1/100th of a second. F5, I could have brought my F number down a little bit. Quite a static photograph. Interviewer sitting very still. Chap being interviewed, his hands there are still, but it looks like he might move his hands around a bit, in which case they would come out blurred. The way that he's talking is he's talking straight at the interviewer, so pretty static, and the 1/100th of a second has worked all right there. Stage photography, using the available light, we've now jumped up to 1/800. So that's getting fast all the time, and the lights are bright enough at this particular show where they have amazing lights, and the stage folk are really, really good at what they do. You're going to want to be using a fairly fast shutter speed because these guys are playing the instruments, and you want to get that as sharp as possible. So that's at we're on 1/800th of a second now. Outdoors, 1/800th of a second. Remember the saying, faster is sharper, so wherever you can photograph at a very, very high shutter speed, it is better. So outdoors, bright day, you can see the shadows in the back here. So it was, maybe even around about lunchtime or late morning, giving you bright, bright sun. This particular one, you can see there's no sun shining on the bottles or on the bucket. I've taken this underneath an umbrella. Also 1/800th of a second, my daughter on a pony on the beach. The wave in the background is frozen. What you can also see is the horse trotting through the water, and the water is pretty frozen. 1/800th is not that fast for somebody galloping along the beach, but in this case it was fast enough. Also 1/800th, I was photographing some test drives of these Mercedes-Benz vehicles, and pretty static. Again, uphill over a bit of a rocky terrain there, so they're not going very fast, so 1/800 was okay. Not a lot of wind where the flag is in focus. If they were going downhill very, very fast, then maybe I would need to up my shutter speed. Flames, you can use whatever speed you want to use with flames. Here I've used 1/800. You can play around and see what it looks like. If you go slower, you'll get more of a blurry flame. If you go faster, you'll get more of a, as with water, it basically freezes the motion. You can do lots of photographs of portraits, lots of portrait photography, 1/800th of a second. Here I've used my 70 to 200mm lens. I want to get my speed fairly fast. I photographed this at almost 200mm. So any movement, the longer your lens, any movement is going to be exaggerated and you're going to end up with camera shake. So the faster is sharper. Also, a bright sunny day, 1/800th of a second. Freezes any motion. I was on a boat here, so there'd be extra motion, not just camera shake, but also motion of the boat rocking. Now we're up to 1/6400th of a second. So a horse jumping, it's my daughter on her pony, jumping on a bright sunny day. The sun was fairly low coming from behind my right shoulder in this case, and the pony's jumping with a hedge behind. That hedge with the fast shutter speed has actually come out quite black. I have converted it into black and white and also played around in Lightroom here where I've made the blacks a little bit darker, brought the shadows down to make that background that much deeper black. Having a white pony certainly has helped in this case. If there was a black pony, they would be pretty lost against the background. On to 1/8000th of a second, so early morning down at a beach in Cape Town called Boulders Beach, and the penguin waving to the camera there, bending its head into the sun, and you can see the droplets on the penguin. So at 1/8000th of a second, f2.8, ISO 800, we got a really good sharp photograph there. Again, faster is sharper. Sunrises, sunsets, if you take them at a very fast shutter speed, what a pleasure. There, 1/8000th of a second, I would have also have underexposed this quite a bit, which gives you a wonderful silhouette of the folk walking towards the sun, walking underneath the sun. I've also used the rule of thirds in this case, where they're walking basically in towards the sun. Bright sunlight, this is down at Robben Island where Nelson Mandela was in prison for so many years. So I used a very wide aperture there of f2.8, and that allows me to photograph at 1/8000th of a second, which gives you a very, very sharp photograph. Bucking Bronco, 1/8000th of a second, that has really frozen the motion here. You can see the bits of sand shooting up behind the horse galloping around here, and that has really frozen the motion. You can see that it's an action photograph, but it's not blurred in any way whatsoever. Likewise with water, I showed you that one earlier on, which I photographed at 1/10th of a second, I think it was, or 1/4 of a second, where you had the spray shooting out. Here you've got the spray actually frozen. So all these dark dots, that's all the water that's actually frozen in the early morning sunrise, giving it also a bit of a silhouette effect. You can take photographs of static things. 1/8000th of a second, that's a flower in our garden, and it's just giving it a nice sharp image there at 1/8000th of a second. Also, not a lot of movement in this photograph. There is a bit of movement with the horse sending out the sand there. In this case, though, it was fairly late in the morning that we did the photograph. We got a lot of white reflecting off that sand. And therefore we needed to do a very, very high shutter speed. I'm photographing at f2.8, so that's also allowing a lot of light into the photograph. And in order to balance, to get the right exposure, I've used a very, very fast shutter speed. You can see my ISO there. ISO 200 is also very low. And then to end off with another one of a horse also down on our local beach. You've got the pony in the background, you've got the birds flying in the foreground. And by using 1/8000th of a second, you have this bird actually frozen in mid-air. You can even see the separate feathers on the bird's wing. I've used a very small f number, f2.8, which is blurred my daughter and a pony out in the background showing the birds in the foreground. And I think that is it. Well, there's one more action shot there of a surfer taking a wipeout. 1/8,000th of a second. That just shows it a nice crisp photograph. The wave is perfectly in focus and sharp, and you can see the expression on his face as he takes a wipeout there, sort of captured in midair. Here's one last one in the sequence, another one of waves. So obviously my passion, horses and waves in the sea. And 1/8,000th of a second, that photograph of the wave is really frozen in motion there. You can see the whole splash. You can almost feel the crash of the wave against the rocks. So thank you very much for watching this. I hope you've learned something. The beauty is that that video will always be available. You can always go back and you can view it on your own, see the settings up at the top there if you want to recreate any of the settings that I've used here. Thanks so much for watching. Ciao.